Thanks everybody for being here. We're going to be talking a lot about climate change and the solutions and the approaches we need to take to address this incredibly important issue. We are in the year 2025, and it's a pretty strange time. When I think about this, I often say that we're in a race. We're always in a race between a different future because history unfolds in real time. We don't know what the future is going to be. It's still being shaped by our actions, by the actions of other people. It is a script that we continue to write as we go. But we have a lot of different options available to us in the year 2025 about what the future could look like. Some of them are really bad. Some of them, though, could be really great. And it's up to us to write that script. But I think in this year, especially after the results of elections and backsliding climate commitments and failures of international negotiations and all these things, I think we can see a whole spectrum of possible outcomes still. There is one set of outcomes that's really pretty terrible. That's a world where we don't step up and address climate change at all. We just continue to let things get worse and worse and worse. And we go towards the kind of very bad end of the spectrum. And that's a world we don't want. That's a world where we literally undermine ourselves and the world around us and future generations due to our lack of action. It's a world where increasing patterns of disturbances in the weather and climate, breakdown of environmental systems, breakdown of climate patterns, breakdown of society begins to mount further and further and even accelerate. That's a world that's very dangerous. It's a world we do not want, and it's reckless and it's irresponsible. And we don't need to do that. So that's a world we don't want. That's the cautionary tale. We're not there, but we could be headed that way depending on our choices and our actions. Another world, though, is also possible at the other end of the spectrum. This is the world where we get it largely right. Now, we don't avoid all climate change. We can't. Some of it's already here today, as we know. But we avoid the very worst outcomes. And we steer away from the edge of the cliff. We steer away from danger and avoid the worst aspects of climate change. But in the process, and this is the beautiful part, in the process of avoiding this terrible dilemma of climate change, we end up building a better world than we've ever seen before. A world that's more equitable, a world that's more prosperous, a world that is safer, more sustainable, healthier, and just better. It's a world where we don't just act sustainably, we thrive. And I believe we can get there. I believe that this is a world we can reach. It's a world we can attain. It's a world that we can win the race for. But in order for us to win this race for the future, build and leave behind a far, far better world, I think we need to focus on a number of new things. And I'm going to just talk about three of them this morning. I think as a scientist, it's probably natural that I'm going to argue that we need to listen to science as a guide, not a prescription of telling us what to do, but maybe how to do it. Science has helped us already when it comes to climate change. After all, it's told us about the problem in the first place. If it weren't for good science, we wouldn't know that the planet was warming very clearly. After all, it's happening due to invisible gases in the air that we can't even see. And so thanks to science, starting in the 19th century, in fact, we figured out the problem of climate change and what's causing it and why it's happening today. Incidentally, people don't often realize this, but the first person to write about climate change and the fact that CO2 would warm the planet was not Joseph Tyndall. That's the person that usually gets the credit. But it was in fact, a few years before that, a woman named Eunice Foote, Foote, in 1856. And yeah, you heard that right, 1856, not 1956, 1856. Eunice Foote wrote a paper showing that CO2 building up in the atmosphere could warm the planet. She didn't get credit for that until recently. She really didn't get the credit she deserves. And so I think we had to make up for that a little bit now and make sure that her name is in every textbook. But now that we are well past understanding the problem, we have to focus now on the solutions. We got the diagnosis. Now we need the cure. And science can help us here too, because it turns out that despite what our current leaders in America might tell us, or what you might learn on social media, shouting doesn't make you smart. Just because somebody is confidently yelling at us that they have the perfect solution to climate change and they have the one and only answer, and it's very convenient and we can just buy it from them, usually, that's not how this should work. We should listen to the evidence, not who shouts the loudest. And we should look at all the different kinds of solutions to climate change and say, hey, wait a minute, where's the data? Where's the evidence? Show me multiple independent sources of information that confirm what you're hearing. And look across this body of evidence and figure out, like, yeah, okay, this seems to actually work. And this kind of seems to not work. And science can help us figure that out. Now, first of all, it's pretty basic. The science tells us the first and most important thing we have to do is to cut the emissions. And we know where the emissions are coming from. They come from six big areas. First, we often hear about making electricity, burning coal and natural gas, for example, in power generation stations to make electricity. Okay, good. We know how to cut emissions here. Energy conservation is one area, but also producing electricity with no carbon. That could be with nuclear, it could be with hydro, but increasingly with cheap renewables like solar, wind, and so on. So we have that. We also surprisingly have a similar amount of emissions coming from the food system. That's from deforestation of tropical rainforest, making more land for cattle, more land for palm oil, more land for animal feed and soybeans, things like that. It also comes from cow burps. You've heard about that, enteric fermentation inside cows. It comes from rice fields as methane. It comes from nitrous oxide from over-fertilizing our farm fields. So the food system is a big contributor too. And we often don't hear about that, but it's just about as big as electricity. Another big area is industry. Here, what we really mean, technically speaking, is making certain things. For example, making steel, making concrete and cement, making plastics and so on and so on, but also disposing of stuff. In that industry bucket, we also have things like landfills and wastewater treatment, which are surprisingly large emitters of methane and CO2. Then we have transportation. We all know that one, cars mostly, trucks, trains, boats, and a little sliver of that is airplanes. Airplanes get a lot of attention because per person, they emit a lot, but it turns out most people in the world don't really fly very much. So aviation is about like maybe a little less than 2% of global emissions. Jeff Bezos's wedding is way less than that. But all summer we heard about how Jeff Bezos's wedding is going to doom the planet. That's kind of hyperbole. Now, those numbers are really small, but they do provoke a lot of outrage and are good clickbait, but that's not carbon. So transportation is mostly ground vehicles, all domestic, and freight aviation is about 1.8%, and private jets are like 0.001%. Then we have buildings on top of the electricity they consume and the stuff they're made out of, which are counted already in electricity and industry, also emit another 5 to 6% from the stuff in the basement. Furnaces, boilers, hot water heaters, leaking air conditioners, things like that. So the built environment actually is quite a large share, but it's counted in a few different places. And then we have energy processing, taking crude oil out of the ground or mining coal out of the ground and turning it into stuff that we could use, like diesel fuel, jet fuel, gasoline, things like this. Processing and producing energy in the various fossil forms is the last little bit. We can double click on all this, and it's actually very, very interesting. I can share these slides with you as a PDF. And if you like, you can study these kinds of diagrams and show exactly where the emissions come from. And often we're surprised. So first and foremost, figure out where the emissions are coming from and then cut them like crazy. Then we can talk about removing carbon, that is taking the pollution back after we've emitted it. Be careful here. Carbon removal right now on Earth is essentially zero. All the efforts we've had to plant trees, you hear a lot about regenerative agriculture, you hear about machines that take carbon out of the atmosphere. Even if you took all of that and multiplied by like 1,000,000, you still wouldn't be able to measure it in the atmosphere. That's how small it is. It's like basically nothing. So yes, maybe someday that could grow to be a significant number, but right now it's all about cutting emissions. A really good metaphor for this is a bathtub. If your bathtub is overflowing in your house and water's pouring over the edges, splashing all over the floor, destroying your bathroom and your home, coming down the ceiling, coming down the walls, what's the first thing you do? You turn off the tap. Just get a little sponge and try to keep up and wipe it up with a sponge. You turn off the faucet. Same thing with climate change. If pollution's pouring into the sky every day, let's turn off the faucet. And then, yes, let's grab a mop too, but the mop is never going to keep up with the ongoing pouring of pollution into the atmosphere. So cut emissions. than if you can remove some carbon. And science tells us what solutions actually could work. At Project Drawdown, this is what we do all day, every day, pretty much, is we look at what solutions are the most effective. A number of years ago, we wrote a very popular book. It became a New York Times bestseller that reviewed about 100 climate solutions in a coffee table book showing that, yeah, we already have a whole bunch of solutions that work today, that are sizable, that added together could stop climate change. We have a whole bunch in electricity, for example. We get a whole bunch in food. We get about 100 of them overall that, if you added them together, would actually be able to stop climate change now. That we didn't have to wait for new inventions and new technologies. That's great that Bill Gates wants to go do that, but we don't have to wait for that. In fact, waiting for that is the worst possible idea. We should start deploying what we have now, and we have a lot already. And not only are these solutions effective, they're actually affordable today too, which is really good news. When we look at the cost of climate solutions and build what economists like to call a cost curve, where we stack up solutions from the cheapest ones all the way to the most expensive ones, we get a curve that looks like this. What it shows is solutions below the line in that kind of yellow area. These are solutions that are actually cheaper than the things they replace. For example, replacing a coal power plant with solar farms makes electricity a lot cheaper because solar is cheaper than coal. Wind is cheaper than coal. Add batteries, it's still cheaper than coal or natural gas. So when President Trump talks about going back to digging coal for electricity, no one in their right mind is going to do that. It's too expensive. Because the economics are already starting to win. Electric vehicles are cheaper than regular cars too, maybe not the initial sticker price. But when you look at the lifetime cost of every gas tank you didn't have to buy, and the fact that electric cars will last forever and have almost no other parts than just a motor, they will last a lot longer and are far cheaper to own over 5, 10 years than gas-powered cars. It turns out 80% of climate solutions available today are cheaper than the things they're going to be replacing. So when people argue, oh, it's not economical to address climate change, they're full of crap. That's not true. Turns out it's actually the only economical thing to do is to switch to cleaner and cheaper forms of energy and moving people around and heating our homes and all these kinds of things. It's only about 20% of climate solutions that are more expensive and only about 5% that are a lot more expensive. We'll have to think about those. Maybe we don't deploy those right away. Maybe we need to innovate those a little bit more, make them cheaper and better, and maybe we have to subsidize them a little bit. But for the most part, addressing climate change is the biggest win for the economy you can even imagine. And it prevents us from wrecking the planet. That's pretty cool. So that's the what of climate solutions. What do we have available? What size are they? And what do they cost? We also have to know more about the how of stopping climate change. And there are a few rules about the how. How mostly involves time. Time is the most important variable when it comes to climate change. And when you think about it this way, a lot of things suddenly become clear. Because stopping climate change is a problem of time, because it has to accumulate over time. That is, like, the warming we see on Earth today in 2025 wasn't just because of this year's emissions or even last year's emissions. It's due to the emissions over the last 100 years and more building up in the atmosphere, creating a thicker and thicker blanket of greenhouse gases that's warming the planet. Climate solutions thinning that blanket, if you will, is going to take time as well. So when we cut emissions now, in this next decade, let's say, we could prevent all that blue area from ever being poured into the atmosphere. All that blue stuff never happened if we address climate change this decade. The next decade, we could do a little bit more. The decade after that, we could do a little bit more. Maybe we could grow up carbon removal, etc. But the longer we wait, the less impact solutions can have, because it's the impact of a solution per year times the number of years that it was operating for the total impact. Just like saving up money for retirement, you hear about the time value of money, right? That you should start saving for retirement maybe when you're young and keep adding money every year to build up a big pile of money so you can retire someday. You don't start saving for retirement when you turn 64. The same thing's true with climate change. There's a time value of carbon as well. And it tells you early investments pay off in the long run. That's why at Project Drawdown, we talk a lot about emergency brake climate solutions, the ones that can work right now and have a very fast impact. Those include stopping deforestation, because if you stop deforestation, all the carbon that a benefit of that happened today. It isn't replacing a coal power plant or maybe replacing the carbon that would have been released over 30 years. It's the carbon that would have gone up in smoke today. So you get a front loaded impact. It's also important that emergency brakes also apply to methane and black carbon and fluorinated gases, gases that heat the atmosphere much faster than CO2, what we call super pollutants. And so emergency brakes are disproportionately fast and they help bend the curve right now on climate change. But also we know that other solutions take more time, like building infrastructure of like new energy production, electric cars, charging stations, retrofitting homes. That's going to take a little while. We're all fond of nature-based solutions like replanting forests, rebuilding soils, but that takes even longer. It takes 20, 30, 40, 50 years for the carbon to start building up adequately and really beginning to bend the curve on climate change. So don't expect a lot of impact for a long time. And of course, new technologies like fusion, lab-grown heat, direct air capture, things like that. Well, those don't really work right now, not at scale. And it may be years, if not decades, until they're available. Fusion, we've been working on that since 1954, and we're really not any further along than we were in 1954. The joke in fusion is it's 20 years away and always will be. So don't hold your breath. So we need to make sure we not only look at the size of solutions and the cost of solutions, but also the speed of solutions, because that's what really matters most of all. Fast solutions get the job done. We also now, thanks to the power of big data and other things, we can also focus our solutions to the most important places and geographies. For example, you might think about the methane emissions from oil refineries as being spread out across America. But in fact, we can find these kind of pinpoint sources. Like this is an oil refinery that illegally released a whole bunch of methane for a few hours, hoping nobody would notice. And they never disclosed it. But we did notice. We know exactly where it is, who it is, and saw it on a satellite. So we can literally name and shame specific polluters and make sure we shut that stuff down. We also now have satellite data tracking forest around the world every single day at 3-meter resolution, knowing how forests are being changed and how they're being cleared and why and by whom. So we know that forests are being cleared in the kind of red areas by big commodity agriculture like beef, animal feed, palm oil, etc. We can zoom in to a particular region, let's say Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and see which forests are being cleared. We see about 12% of the forests are being cleared, but when we overlap a map of where forests are being cleared and a map of the carbon in those forests, especially the carbon below ground in peatland soils, these big kind of swampy peat soils in the tropics, we find that most of the carbon actually is being lost in 1.6% of the forested area. That means we can zoom in very precisely and know where to focus. At Project Drawdown, we're also using these kinds of tools to figure out how to focus on things like methane from rice fields in this case, also from cattle and other things. And we can zoom in and find, in particular across South Asia, Southeast Asia, kind of hotspots of activity where we can focus our efforts. We also can provide a lot more regional detail now, in this case for Vietnam, about what's the best thing to do to cut climate change where you live, down to the local level now. So in the north, it's protecting the forest. In the south, in those blue areas, it's changing the way you grow rice. So we can now do drawdown-like analyses down to the zip code everywhere on the planet. And that's a huge breakthrough into kind of the work that we're doing. And finally, I think we can look far beyond the impacts of climate solutions on carbon and think about the other good things they might give us. For example, getting rid of fossil fuels gets rid of a big source of CO2 that contributes to climate change, but it also gets rid of big sources of soot and smog that we breathe. And it turns out that the air pollution caused by fossil fuels that we breathe, not just the CO2 that warms the planet, but the crap in the air that we breathe and affects our lungs and causes disease and death. It turns out that about 9 million people a year are being killed from air quality problems linked to fossil fuels. Think about that. 9 million people a year are killed by fossil fuels. That simple. That's more than the deaths from tobacco, guns, and war combined. And we just let it happen because it's poor people. It's people without a lot of political power or voice around the world. It's mostly children, young people, people of color, people with little income, people without political voice. We don't even look at it. So getting rid of fossil fuels not only helps stop climate change, it gets rid of one of the biggest killers of people in the world. I think that's a pretty good reason to get rid of fossil fuels, don't you? And that's not all. We've been tracking how many climate solutions actually create a whole cascade of other benefits to jobs being created that can't be outsourced or turned into AI, into better health, better food, better water, better energy, better everything. So it turns out climate solutions are far more than climate solutions. They tend to be just good solutions to make the world better. So this is the science we need around acting on climate, that we can think about solutions that are bounded by evidence, not just what people are telling us, but they're backed up by independent, verified, multiple source data to know what really works. Just like you would in medicine, let's look at the clinical trials. Let's look at the data. Let's look at the evidence, not just hyperbole on social media. We can find out that climate solutions are usually very cost effective. They not only are cheap, they make you or save you money if you look at them the right way. We also have to look at climate solutions that are here now and that are fast so they can get to work. Don't wait for the Bill Gates stuff that's going to be here in 50 years. Get the stuff that works now because we need to do it now. We can now also target solutions to the right place in the right mixtures to be most effective. And maybe we could prioritize solutions that give us other big benefits like a whole bunch of new jobs, clean air, better health, better water, better food, better ecosystems, better communities, better security, better everything. And so we have still a great window of opportunity to address climate change. It is not too late. Anybody who tells you that, stop listening to them because they're full of crap. That's not true. We can absolutely still stop climate change from getting much, much worse. Absolutely, we can, if we follow the science. We could accelerate climate action dramatically. I think we could get 10 times more effective with every dollar we spend addressing climate change by following the science more carefully. And if we do that, we can still get the job done. If we don't, we won't do that, but we can, and I think we will. But science is never just enough all by itself. It is a good guide, but it's not the motivation for doing this. So beyond the science, I think we need two other things. And most of all of those things, I think we need dreams. Now that sounds weird coming from a scientist. Why do we need dreams? Well, I think we need dreams very badly right now because we're all feeling like we're stuck in somebody's nightmare. When it comes to climate change, well, heck, when it comes to any issue in the world right now, the dominant narrative is usually something like the world is going to hell. And those people over there, those people, they're the reason why, and they're the ones to blame. We've been here before. That's how authoritarians like to get power. That's how institutions that want to control us, to tell us these terrible nightmare stories about everything's going to hell and those other people are the reason why, and you should be mad at them. That's a very convenient little dodge, isn't it? But it's also not true. We are stuck in somebody else's nightmare of anxiety, fear, polarization, and hatred. We don't have to be. We don't have to play that game. We don't have to let the politicians and the activists and the media conglomerates win and scare the hell out of us and divide us and polarize us. Because it turns out we're actually not very divided after all. Despite what you might think, in the United States, for example, you might think that half the country doesn't believe in climate change, thinks it's a big hoax, and the other half strongly believes in climate change and wants to tax the hell out of everybody. That's not true at all. It turns out even in the United States, about 70 to 90% of Americans and people around the world know that climate change is real. It's actually closer to 92% in the latest data I've seen, depending on how you ask the question. People are looking around and saying, yeah, things are changing. The weather patterns are changing. We're probably doing that. That's not where the disconnect is. You don't have to argue with that one person out of 10 who still believes it's a big conspiracy. They're nuts. Don't bother with those people. It's not worth your time. It's the same people who think the earth is flat and believe in space lasers or other kind of crazy stuff. There are always conspiracy nut jobs out there. Just leave them alone. You don't have time for them. I don't have time for them. 90% is a win. Take it. And it turns out we're not divided on this issue. The disconnect isn't about whether climate change is real. It's whether or not it's the issue you care about the most. It turns out in the United States, no more than 2% of Americans have ever said any environmental issue is their top concern. Even today, less than 2% of Americans say climate change is the top issue facing them or the nation. In every Gallup poll ever taken, the environment never gets more than 2%. But you know what does? Jobs, cost of living, community, health, education, things like that. Kitchen table issues, the stuff we all care about. That's where 90% of people care about things. Let's meet people there. Maybe we can meet people where they are, not where we want them to be. Maybe we can talk to them about, hey, these climate solutions can actually create jobs in our community and help us. They can lower your cost of energy. They can lower inflation. They can make you more prosperous. They can make your community better. It can make it healthier, stronger, more resilient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can dramatically improve this conversation by not falling into the trap of fear and polarization and us versus them thinking, or demanding everybody else see the world the way we do. Instead, let's have a real conversation where we balance the problems of climate change. Don't even talk about that anymore. Scaring people with doomsday stories of climate change doesn't work. It only activates people's amygdala in the brain. They just fight, flight, or flee. You don't want that. So what we ought to talk about is climate solutions. Then people listen, not react. And we talk about solutions. We can talk about the things they care about, not what you care about. Meet people where they are. Talk about the jobs that are being created, the clean air that's being created, the better, healthier communities that are being created, and so on. Building a better future and showing people that a better future is possible. I don't know where this went, but I was born in the 60s and the 70s growing up as a kid. We all kind of thought there was a Star Trek future, that maybe there'd be a better future out there somewhere, that maybe we'd live to see that. Where did that dream go? I think there still is a dream, though, of a better future. We need to go back and own it and shout it to people and demonstrate that a dream of a better future is still there. Let's dream of a better future and invite other people to join us in building it. But Martin Luther King didn't go around America or around the world saying, I have a nightmare. He talked about his dream. And we're still trying to build his dream. He died for his dream. It didn't get finished in his lifetime, and we're still very far from that dream. But it set us on a course towards a better future. Maybe we could do the same with the environment and dream of a better world that is also sustainable and thriving and better. And maybe others will join us in building that too. But we can't do that if we're stuck in a night. And finally, with science and better dreams, now we got to go get the work done. And that's where we need heroes. And I don't mean people with capes on big screens in a movie somewhere. I don't mean tech titans, billionaires. I don't mean elected politicians, celebrities, music stars, you name it. Absolutely not. I mean just ordinary folks, people like you and me, people that we know in our neighborhoods, communities, families all across the world. Ordinary people who do extraordinary things. Because it is not game over on climate change. It is not too late. Absolutely not. That is the biggest lie you will ever hear. It's not game over. It's game on. This is the moment we step up. This is the moment we get to be the best people we've ever been. This is the moment we take our science, we take our dreams, we start building a future we can be proud of, leaving behind a world that we can be proud to be ancestors of. Yes, let's be guided by science, but inspired by dreams of a better future. That's the North Star. And let's all be heroes, borrowing from David Bowie, even for just one day. So with that, I'll stop here and just say thank you. Thank you for your interest in your work on climate change. That's what's going to change the world. It's all of us kind of chipping in every corner, every way we can.